Yeah, hello and welcome to a New Courage Skyline Talk. I have the pleasure and honor to talk today to Julia Friedlander. Julia Friedlander is Managing Director of the Atlantik-Brücke in Germany. Welcome.
Thanks so much for the invitation. Look forward to speaking.
With Julia Friedlander, I will talk about how could it be any different, US election, strengths, weaknesses, her perception, and also aspects of communication. And before we start and dive into the questions, Julia, you have such an impressive vita, I gotta say. You started your career at the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, as an economic analyst.
Yes, but nothing scary or spooky about it.
Nice. And you've been there for 3 years. And afterwards, I gotta look at my notes here so I don't say anything wrong. You went to the US Department of the Treasury, and there you were an there you were senior policy advisor for Europe. Mm-hmm. And in the Office of Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes. I suppose the CIA background was helpful.
Yes, but also my background in financial markets. That's a long way of saying that's the part of the Treasury Department that does sanctions.
Okay, very interesting. And afterwards, you worked for a long time in Washington for the White House. So you were really exactly where the politics is happening in the United States, a lot of experience. Before then, about 2 years ago, you decided to move to Germany and work for the Atlantik-Brücke. Are you still happy about this decision?
I'm very happy about this decision. I was in Washington for 15 years, which is enough time for anyone. As a transatlanticist, it's always useful to leave your own bubble and go to the other bubble. Berlin is also a bubble, of course. But I love the Atlantik-Brücke because it is just a wide spectrum of leadership in Germany, from politicians to business, industry, journalists. We even have some artists. So it gives you the opportunity to work on the transatlantic relationship really on the granular level. So I love this job, and Berlin is my second home.
Wow. And you're the first American actually in this role, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. It's a German organization, and of course in Germany, a deep professional network, but also a transatlantic organization. But you need to speak German for this job. So I think that the list is probably short who could do that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I know from former conversations, your German is absolutely fluent, hardly hear any accent. Yeah, and what is it exactly? Can you maybe describe in 1 or 2 sentences what is the role of the Atlantik-Brücke? What is your objective and your goals?
Sure. I mean, so it was one of the transatlantic organizations that was founded after the Second World War. And the main goal at the time, and it was founded by German Jewish refugees who had escaped the Nazis and went to New York, by the way, my hometown. And then after the war, came back and played a very crucial role in reestablishing democratic institutions in then West Germany, and convinced the US government, for example, to give Germany the Marshall Plan, which was not a given. So, as the organization is now 70 years old, and you're always looking for the new version of that, like how can you play this integral role between government and business and civil society to really create a functioning transatlantic relationship. And we're going to talk about politics today, but for me, it's important that experts work with experts, because even after the Second World War, it was clear that that the West needed to hold itself together. It's even more true now, in a very globalized, multipolar world. Germany can't live without the United States, and the United States can't live without Germany either. We need each other. So absolutely. So in every aspect. So almost anyone who works in a high-level position in Germany is a transatlanticist, even if he or she wouldn't say, I'm a transatlanticist. You work in a world that's affected by the transatlantic relationship. So if you work for a bank, you work on the transatlantic relationship. If you work in politics or in foreign policy, if you work in the arts, So it's a very diverse organization in terms of what our membership is. I have a staff of 16. We do events all over Germany, in the UK, US, and Canada. Yeah, so it's at one side a transatlantic organization, the other side a professional network in Germany. And for me, it's fun after working in the United States government, being a bureaucrat or a technocrat,
Right.
to run an organization like this, because it's very flexible.
Well, yeah, impressive. And it's one of the most renowned ones. And what I hear, and yeah, impressive. And you're about to leave to the United States again, right? So you're back and forth all the time.
Yeah, quite
Okay.
frequently, which is good for my family. My family is in New York, and so we see each other often. Yeah, so I'm flying to New York tomorrow. We are doing a very large economics conference on the margins of the UN General Assembly. So I'll visit my family and then we'll take the stage, so to speak, in New York for a big conference. So it'll be a busy week. Yeah.
Oh, impressive. Great. So it's perfect. You really are in the United States almost every second week, and in Germany. And the perception in the United States of the election, and also what the media writes about, is slightly different. So I'm very curious what you're going to say now when we talk about the US election. According now to the latest research, Kamala Harris was, when we talk about the debate, really performing better than Donald Trump. What is your perception on this? Is this also the perception in the United States? And which kind of topics, Julia, were you maybe missing during the debate?
I mean, the debate was in the end more concrete about issues than I expected. I thought it would have been sort of a food fight, a personality contest. I think it was clear, and it's clear according to the poll results that are first coming out now, right? The first post-debate polls are first coming together. That most would say that Kamala Harris won the debate, and that's pretty hard to dispute if you watch it. She knew how to trigger Donald Trump, and he fell into every single one of her rhetorical traps. I felt it was, I used to work in the White House. I recognize the patterns of speech that he has. And when I didn't watch it in the middle of the night, I saved myself from that in Germany, but I watched it the following morning. I was sitting next to my husband and we were just laughing all the time.
Really?
We were laughing. Yeah, the whole thing was a spectacle. I do think that Americans, and like about 70 million people watched this debate, right? But I think what's maybe surprises a lot of people is it's not going to change. I mean, they'll say she won the debate because rhetorically she won the debate. Whether it actually leads to a big change in voter behavior we'll have to see. Because a lot of, people are, I think, again, she sent him into rhetorical traps. He couldn't finish some of his sentences. He talked about conspiracy theories. But at the same time, a lot of voters still have a lot of questions about what policies Kamala Harris is going to put on the table. I mean, economic policy, first and foremost. I think what is not to be underestimated in an international or a German audience, how much very tactile economic issues are steering this debate. There's inflation in Germany, but inflation in the US has a much more direct effect because 60% of the population lives paycheck to paycheck. So, and when interest rates rise, I mean, the Federal Reserve just cut rates yesterday. So we'll see what that does.
Even more than we expected, right?
More than we expected, and it's going to come again. But if mortgages are, that's how buying a house in the US is how you build wealth. It's how you save for retirement. And so you have generations saying, my purchasing power has eroded, my wages have not caught up to inflation. And at the same time as there's inflation, there's also high interest rates. I don't know how I'm supposed to build the structures of the American life, so to speak. And so and if you watch the debate, they're arguing back and forth. Who caused inflation, right? When the reality is the Trump administration caused inflation and the Biden administration caused inflation and the pandemic caused inflation. But voters aren't necessarily going to be like, okay, well, that person was responsible for exactly that policy measure. They're just looking at the tactile facts, and we'll compare and say, okay, well, under the Trump administration, we had skyrocketing capital markets, we had very little inflation, and interest rates were low. And so when it comes down to it, and you're gonna vote for your pocketbook,
Right.
say, I don't know, Kamala Harris hasn't told me how she's fixing it now, right? And she has a couple of proposals.
Yeah.
I don't think it necessarily pushes us over the curve.
Okay, very interesting. So you're saying really the debate, she won the debate, but it may not have any effect in the end. And the key topics like inflation, like you just said, they didn't talk about it. And Kamala Harris doesn't really have a program yet. At least it didn't come across during the debate.
Or enough of one, right? To say we're not going to tax tips and we're going to give homeowners a buyback, basically, sort of a step up for their down payments.
That's true.
I don't think it's enough, quite frankly. Yeah. So rhetorically, she won the debate. And if you're someone who's paying attention to the personality, if you're willing to be turned off by his personality, which,
yeah. The polarization, if we come to the next question, polarization in the United States has really increased majorly. And do you think this may have an impact also on European partners, on Germany?
It's an interesting question. I think that, it's a trend that we're seeing in developed countries as a whole.
Yeah.
A lot because we are seeing an erosion of industrial and economic stability. So I sit in Germany, and people here also read headlines about companies closing. And so I think political polarization is not an American phenomenon. It's moving over the Atlantic, But in the US, of course, we have a presidential system. We have a two-party system. So it seems very binary. And so I think, the societal trends have a way of, sharing themselves with each other. So I think one of the impact on Europe is that some of those same trends that we see through the election of Donald Trump are taking root in Europe as well. But that being said, I do think in everyday life, when you travel through the US and you talk to people, it's not as polarized as the media makes it out to be. Most people say we just want some decency. Where we want the world to stop spinning so fast, right? We want clear communication. We want our politicians to put good proposals on the table. We want Washington to stop being such a mess. And there's as a result, there's much more trust in local politicians. So local city officials, governors, representatives, because they're more accessible, right?
We don't have to worry, should the Democrats win, that once again there will be a run on the White House.
I don't think so, not because there won't be political violence. I think that there is preparation for some political violence, but they've prepared for it. And I think that there are going to be high fences around all of those buildings. So it might take another form, right? Certainly there might be a lot of questioning of election results, trying to get the courts to challenge it, but the Capitol building, the building of the people, will probably be surrounded by a very high fence.
Okay. Another really interesting aspect in the moment with this election is technology and disinformation. we have the impression it plays a major role. If you see, I think the media spending also for both parties is as high as it has never been before. And you see like X, for example, even Musk being involved, the communication, and also the fake news that's going on in the moment. How do you see this, Julia? I mean, this is scary. I gotta say, as a German, I'm scared about this. And we see it, similar developments here in Germany as well.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's, I mean, the question is like, where do you get your news from? Right. And if you operate in your own bubble, I mean, my bubble is reading the New York Times, which, you know, some people would say that's a bubble. Sure, fine. But I do think that there's an aspect of how algorithms function and turn people towards certain kinds of content. What I don't think, I mean, you're also asking about disinformation. I mean, of course, this horrible rumor essentially in Missouri against Haitian immigrants and eating animals. I mean,
in Springfield.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
have it here
exactly.
still, yeah, eating cats and dogs, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I mean, look, it's, the scary thing is less that that someone writes something stupid on the internet, but that politicians who know better use it for their own benefit. If you see like senators retweeting it just because they think they're going to score some political point. It's not X itself. It's not Elon Musk. It's others who just say, in this moment, in this crazy moment, I'm just gonna retweet this because I think it'll help me. On the broader disinformation question, but foreign interference, that's where we really thought we had a problem, and we did in 2016. And we certainly shouldn't underestimate that. Foreign countries that are not necessarily friends of the United States are trying to tip the scales in one direction or another. But if you were to ask like cybersecurity authorities, and we've thought, this is the big election year, the Zupa, and there has been a lot less of that kind of messing around than we thought.
Oh,
I
really?
think,
That's interesting.
yes, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that companies are wise to it. And if you're working with an American-based platform, the self-content regulation. I mean, sometimes Europeans get all itchy about not it being the platforms themselves that regulate themselves and not the government. That it actually has made a difference. Yeah.
Who are, in your opinion, the biggest influencers still from abroad, foreigners?
Well,
Russia, China.
Yeah, those are them. You see, actually, right now it's the Iranians that are making the headlines by trying to spread information about Trump, right? They would prefer to, they're tipping the scales towards Kamala Harris because they perceive that the Trump administration will have a stronger course against Iran. Not necessarily true, by the way, but that's their perception. And the Russians and Chinese might be tipping their scales in other directions. But again, I think that, as the American populace will do enough damage to itself, or the politicians will do enough damage to themselves, it's easier to blame others than to blame yourself.
Yeah, I mean, populism, like you're saying, I mean, when Trump was saying, I mean, yeah, in Springfield, they're eating cats and dogs. Do you think it was really a narrative? I mean, some people say he strategically wanted to attract a special target group in the Midwest with this,
or anyone to be sort of to be a race baiter, right? Apparently that works. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't necessarily. I don't mean, look, like racism is something he uses. You can elevate it out of a population. And unfortunately sort of exploit it for political gain. So that's.
Does it work, Julia? Does it work in this target group? I would be curious to see.
I mean, maybe among, I mean, again, like maybe less than media makes it out to be, right? I mean, because I don't think that, I mean, as interesting as the American electorate is, people aren't stupid. Right. Maybe they might send links around and go ha ha ha, but it'll be more of a ha 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 than it is a serious belief, right? But the ha 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 is dangerous enough.
Okay, I'm curious to see how it will evolve, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Role of social media, we talked about it in a way already, you know, and influencers also. I mean, Taylor Swift, it was amazing. I read when she, after the debate, really said, okay, I will vote for Kamala Harris. Really, many, many young voters, like never before, started to register to vote. And what is your perception? If any news on this influencer, role of influencer in this election? I think it has never been like this before, right?
Sure. I mean, there are very few people who can mobilize voters the way that Taylor Swift can. I'm surprised that so many of her fans are above 18. I don't know, like, I mean, I don't know, like, but I think that that's, you know, it was very well timed, obviously, in her communications department. And if you have that kind of role, you have to decide very carefully about when you put out your endorsement or not. And I can understand why, you know, she might have thought, okay, it might actually work against Kamala Harris if I endorse her, because there'll be this, there'll be rumors that, you know, that we worked in cahoots with each other.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I mean, I think that I don't think social media, I mean, it's like, look, there's always been forms of political communication. And from when, you know, FDR using the radio to reach people, to basically network television dominating news, right? But in the United States, we liberalized the media licensing in the 70s and 80s. And since then, there's been a different generations in terms of how people talk to each other and what political debate looks like, and how politicians communicate with each other. I think social media has it's good and bad. In many ways, social media has provided access to much more information than people have had, and diversity of information than they've ever had. That means that people can organize better, people can compare experiences better. It also means that politicians are ultimately a little bit more accountable to people, because their presence is demanded and people are talking about it all the time. As a result of social media, if you go to a bar in the Midwest of the United States, you're more likely to hear people talk about the war in Ukraine than you ever would have before, talking about economic policy than you ever would have before. It's actually a democratization of information. And our politicians are learning how to act in that world. So again, it's not, I think it's in many ways it's a good development, the availability of social media. You know, the politicians really have to make their case.
Yeah. And the fake news thing, I mean, we have to find a way. I mean, Hillary Clinton, I think, was saying the other day, right? We have to put people in jail who put out fake news, really wrong information. I thought that was an interesting statement, but let's see. I think we can stop it, right? It will evolve. We cannot cut social media out of our lives.
No, or should we? I mean, I think, again, in the US, it's very difficult because we have such strong free speech laws, right?
Yeah.
So the spread of fake information is just my opinion. And the line is always, what is an incitement to violence, right? So if you are race baiting people to attack their neighbors, that's something that you can be jailed for in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, Musk, the statement of Musk, right, which he erased later on again on X, I guess you've seen it, right? Where he was saying, how come so far there was only assassination attempts on Trump? This is almost like, hey guys, how can that be? And I'm so glad he erased it. It was shocking to me, I gotta say.
Yep.
Yeah. But okay, Julia, anything else we didn't talk about? We talked about a lot of aspects, yet which you think, in your opinion, is really interesting and different to former elections, maybe in the United States?
I think, well, one thing I would just point out is that, you know, as a result of it being so close, it's going to take a while to know what the results are. So, you know, I don't anticipate that on the 5th or even on the 6th, we're going to know who's going to be the next president of the United States. And so I think that's important for for foreign audiences to understand. It was like this 4 years ago as well. If you remember, the election was on a Tuesday and we knew the results on Saturday. So a little bit of patience is necessary, but also not necessarily, don't let the media presentation of the United States lead you to believe that the place is falling apart, right? We're not going to have a civil war. We've gone through periods of political violence before. It's despicable. But if I talk to my father, okay, and I ask him, compare this to the year of 1968, year of a lot of political violence outside the convention. By the way, it was in Chicago, but also the assassination of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. We are still in a relatively stable period of American history, believe it or not.
Yeah, I believe, but you're right. Yeah, it was a tough time back then. I have a last question. Would it make any difference if red or blue will win, Democrats or Republicans, for Europe, for our economy, for geopolitical aspects?
I mean, I think that there's, I think that obviously with the European governments, there will be much more in common with Harris administration, but ultimately the requests of Europe and the expectations of Europe are similar. They just sound, different in how they're expressed. The United States is not, this is not a unipolar world where the United States gets to set global rules on its own anymore. It needs Germany and Europe as much as Europe needs the United States. And so when we say things like, where's your defense spending? Why aren't you standing up to China? This will all come. It doesn't matter which administration it is.
Right.
Because we need a partner at eye level. Who are we going to call when we're trying to form global policy? We're going to call Europe. We're going to call Berlin as the biggest country of Europe. And so it's important to recognize that criticism comes actually from a position of respect.
That's how you put it. You want to give a guess who will
No.
be winner? Okay. I thought so.
Sorry. If it the polling doesn't work anymore. So if you go onto the New York Times website and you look at like the margins of error on these things, with something that's so close, it'll come down to a couple 100,000 votes in a single state somewhere. This is not the first time. Remember in 2000, a couple of grandmothers didn't understand what ballot they were looking at in Florida, and there was a result. Al Gore did not become president. So yeah, anything can.
Anything can happen. Okay, Julia, thank you very much for your time. Very interesting insights. And yeah, let's see what will happen the next 48 days, I guess. We know more. And have a great flight to the United States.
Thanks, and thanks for the invitation.